Welcome, everybody, to the Indie Game Lunch Hour. Today we're talking with Jack Burrows about creating intimate player connections to the game world.
The Indie Game Lunch Hour.
Mike posted a GIF in the chat during the intro jingle of a cat dancing. I guarantee, Mike, you had that ready, didn't you? You were waiting. That was premeditated. All right. Well, welcome to the Indie Game Lunch Hour. In our live magical podcast, we give devs the chance to hear stories of breaking in from industry experts, as well as directly ask them directly ask them questions about their areas of expertise in the second half of each episode. This is a mostly unedited recording of a weekly event we host on our Discord on Wednesdays at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. We do it every single week, so feel free to swing by and ask your own questions live in the second half of the episode. I'm your host, as always, Willem Delventhal, the headmaster of the Indie Game Academy and the self-proclaimed Wizard of Joy. I am the sixth Maiar, the purple wizard, and joining me today is Jack Burrows. Jack Burrows is a level designer over at NetEase and just a really cool dude. And I'm excited to chat a little bit about creating wonderful connections for our players. Jack, welcome to the show. I'm excited to chat. What are you having for lunch today?
Well, I've got some, maybe I think like a week-old boar's meat ham slices in the fridge.
Huh.
And I had a friend staying in my apartment while I was back home in California. So there's some eggs left over, some cheese, so I might just make a little medley for breakfast there. I'm running on an empty stomach, so forgive me if I get a little ornery. So we'll see how this goes.
I forgive you. I have last year for the second part of the last couple of months, I was doing intermittent fasting. You familiar with that?
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry to hear that.
I've committed to it this year. I'm doing it 100%. I only just had my first food right before this. I mostly like it, but sometimes it makes me angry.
I like that title, My First Food. Yes, I have yet to dine with my own first food.
Indeed. Also, you said boar's meat. Is it literally boar? Because that'd just be way more epic.
No, I think it's literally like the sad, corner of the grocery store that has like boar's meat brand.
Uh-huh.
No, nowhere near as exciting.
Amazing. Well, welcome, Jack. It's awesome to have you on the show. And welcome, everybody, all listeners, to the very first episode of the Indie Game Lunch Hour in 2024. That's amazing. At least the first live episode. What did you do to celebrate the new year, Jack?
Oh, man. I just recently moved to Washington State back in February, so almost a year, so maybe not too recently. But I was just back home in California, Pasadena, with my family, hanging out, man, watching football games. There's a huge parade that happens in Pasadena. I mean, I felt like all we did was eat cheese and lose track of which day it is in the week. So really I was like what did they call it? A DD for my brothers. They're like slowly turning 21. So they were, it's their time down there at the party. So it's my turn to take care of them.
To the young generation. Indeed.
Right.
Indeed. Very cool of you. Well, yeah, welcome everybody to 2024. This is hypothetically, so far as I hear, the year that the game industry stops being terrible. We'll see. I have seen many estimates that Q3 is going to be a good time for all of us. Let's hope that's true. I'm definitely tired of all these layoffs and such. But this episode's not about the game industry. This episode is about you, Jack. And I would love to get started with, of course, our most important question. What is your origin story? How did you get started, and how did you get to where you are today, Jack?
Awesome. Yeah, so I've been playing games since I was like 6 years old. Started with Crash Bandicoot, Jak and Daxter, Ratchet and Clank. Metroid Fusion was the first game I ever owned that my parents gave me. So from like a stupidly young age, I was like so enchanted by this stuff. That's all I wanted to do. It's all I thought about. It's all I would doodle about. It's, whenever you're not paying attention in class, that's where my mind was. So I was just a bad student because of games for like my whole academic career until college. And I only applied to one college, only dreamed of going to one college, which was SCAD, Savannah College of Art and Design. And they were like one of the only schools I could find that was going to teach game design, like game theory, not computer science, which I had no interest in. Had no skills for it, not interested, couldn't do it, couldn't stomach it. But I loved games. I loved the theory of games and what made them so damn fun, why some wouldn't sell while some others did sell. Like all that stuff was just super captivating. So yeah, I had met some really great people in college in Georgia, and we did a ton of game jams, won some awards, made school projects. And then you get out, and I had an internship actually in 2016 in Austin, Texas, making this really cool game called Aven Colony, little sci-fi city builder. And that was really like my first taste of like studio life. It was like five guys that were all veteran developers that had worked on like old Metroid Prime and all kinds of stuff. So those guys really gave me my first shot and I
And how
loved
did
it.
you land that internship out of curiosity?
Oh man, that's an insane story. So in college, we we did the first game jam in like 2014 with like a 20-man team, and we didn't win anything. But I was like, man, this is game development. Let's make an LLC.
I could do
And
games now.
yeah, in the middle of college. So we tried to start a company, and I was literally giving presentations around Savannah, Georgia, at like small business like town meetings, pitching our like 20-man student video game company. And someone was very impressed with my articulation on stage. So I got invited to represent the millennial generation at like this intergenerational panel at the Hilton Head Island Institute. And then someone from that crowd also found me compelling. And they were like, you got to hire this kid. And his name was
Wow.
Paul Tozer, was the owner and founder of Mothership Entertainment in Austin.
Wow.
So he was like, hey man, heard you're cool. Heard you're a cool dude. Come over and work on our cool game. So I did that for like 3
That is
months.
so cool.
It was rad, man. It was nuts. But anyway,
They always
I
say
graduated.
they always say opportunity is like 10% skill and like 20% who you know, and then like 70% just being in the right place.
Oh yeah.
And I feel like
It-
this is a
yeah.
perfect example. Like you made the right place. First of all, you earned that. I'm not saying it was just random.
Yeah.
But still, you got up on stage, you presented yourself, you made sure people were seeing you, noticing you. That's pretty
Yeah.
rad.
Absolutely. Yeah, and there's all manner of butterflies in my gut every time I had to get up somewhere and talk about whatever, Even if you're passionate about it, it can still be tricky. But suffice to say, like I did all that crap, graduated in 2017 in May, I think, and just had this stupid ego. Like, oh, you kidding me? I'm going to be swatting off job applications like suitors lining up at my door. And it didn't happen. Got turned down.
Welcome
for
to the game
dev.
industry.
Yeah. Humbled immediately. And I was like, well, shit, like, that student debt's starting to knock on the door, man. So I was like, I'll do QA. Like, I'll do quality assurance. Let's get my foot in the door. So I started uncomfortably enough, on 9/11 in 2017 was my first day of work. And it was 12 hours a day, 6 days a week for the next 6.5 months on Call of Duty World War II at like an Activision testing office in El Segundo in LA, which is not a studio. Like you're in a corporate office and you're paid like it and you're fed like it. But I'll tell you, I met some of the best people in my life in there. One of my best friends ever sat right next to me. Some of the bosses that I still talk to weekly, like incredibly strong-willed, hardworking folks in there, man. So that was like my like incubation chamber, and then those guys helped me get into Treyarch, which is really where things took off. So from COD World War II, I was a tester on Black Ops 4, and how I got out of that, finally to get a level design internship, was like I used to pull up. I bought Black Ops 3 with my own money so that I could get the mod tools while we were there, because we were working 10 to 10, sometimes 7 days a week, sometimes 8 days a week on Black Ops 4. I mean, it was just hard, man. It was just hard, grueling, focused work. People are like, "Oh, you're just playing video games." Like, oh man, I wish, we were just playing video games. But
Do people still think that? If you think that, you're wrong.
Yeah, it's hard work, man. And those guys, they're so essential. But anyway, like I would be studying the Radiant game engine used to make Call of Duty on my breaks, and my boss would come over and be like, "Why do you have this open?" And I'd be like, "Because I don't want to sit here every day. I want to be downstairs where the designers are." And he was like, "Okay." And I actually tried to leave Treyarch because I was like, "Screw this, I'm done." I tried to go and get a job, and I tell you, I was super overqualified for that QA job. There's no reason I shouldn't have got it, but thank God, man. Like only God works this way. 2 weeks later, while I'm still at Treyarch, my boss comes to me. He's like, "Hey, the level designers need an in like house tester just for them, and that's you." Because he knew that I wanted to be a level designer. So with that, like making connections with the level designers, I took people out to lunch. And so the recruiter, when the level design internship came up, she was like down the hall from QA. I was like, "Hey, I want that job. Like, what do I have to do? Who do I have to talk to? Here's my portfolio. Here's my resume." And yeah, man, just by grace and providence, I got it and loved my team. Finally became a level design intern, and then survived that. Became associate level designer, level 2, yada yada. And then yeah, man, that was sort of the get go. But it was some of the hardest like challenges to your will to like get up every day. I mean, we worked like 14 days straight at one point. It was just
Wow.
gnarly, and I loved COD. I still love COD. I still love playing those games and stuff. Shockingly, but yeah, man, that was sort of the gateway.
Eventually, after 73 hours a week.
Oh, yeah. It was
get a little overcod.
a gauntlet.
Yeah. Wow. I love this story. There's a lot here that I think we could pull out of it for the audience. I think what I mentioned earlier is one of the first ones I want to say, which is just making sure you were in the right place and that you are surfacing yourself to the industry, to other people, and making those connections. Because you never know. It really only takes one person to open an actual door for you and have that have your whole career start. But I think something else I want to call out about your path here is it didn't just start. You didn't just land a level design job. You landed a job that you absolutely didn't want. I mean, air
Yes.
quotes on that. You
Yeah.
wanted.
Yeah.
But not the dream job, I guess. And then you worked your ass off for a long time. And during that time, even working your ass off, 12-hour days, you're still devoting time to also building the skills you know you need to transition into that dream job. And then you're being very deliberate and very vocal about wanting that damn job and making it happen. I love that you're taking people out to lunch. All of you do that. Take people out to a coffee. Even a virtual coffee is adorable.
Yes.
I've done it. You made it happen. That's rad. What a good story.
Thank you, man. No, it was a beautiful thing. And it's like there's so many little triumphs and stuff at every point. It was gnarly for sure. And it didn't I think I'm lucky in that it never like soured or bittered my heart for the thing, because it's like I'm not even doing it yet. Like, why would I get upset? I'm not even doing the thing that I've dreamed of doing yet. Like, I'm not going to stop until I'm sitting there until I know it, until I've tasted the sweet fruit of real game development. Not that QA isn't real game development, but it's like when you get up every day working 12 hours and you're not being asked like what you qualitatively think about the experience. It's like, is it broken or not? Okay, cool. Right? Like we never really got asked like, what do you think about the game? How does it feel? Does this make sense to you? No, it's like, is it broken or not? Cool, thanks. Like, creatively as a creative, like you want to get to that point where you're actually generating ideas, you're participating in the making of something, not just, polishing it essentially. Yeah.
I would like to say two things right here. First of all, everybody knows that this podcast is the de facto source of all things video games forever. So I would like to say here, for posterity and the history of game development, QA is game development, Blizzard. QA are members of your game dev team, and I can't believe that's even a discussion. So the second part that I'd like to say is talk to your QA team. And get feedback from them, especially when you get into a position of a game dev or really any of the other professions that do have more of an impact on it. All members of your team will potentially have good ideas and feedback. So make sure you're listening to them and open up lines of communication to them. I often say, in my belief, I'm curious, Jack, if you think this is true. In my belief, a big part of game design is not actually coming up with the ideas, but instead being kind of a conduit for everything the team comes up with and filtering what seems to fit best with the vision of this game.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, game design, at least at scale, right? Because there's one-off prodigies that, like the guy that made Stardew Valley or whatever, or like the two-man team that made Super Meat Boy.
I don't get it.
There's some geniuses, but no, like by and large, you're going to be working with other people. So you have to be able to like, one, articulate your own ideas calmly and effectively, and also receive. And it's a dance, right? It's like, it's a whole symphony of ideas and concepts, and you're trying to like coagulate and gel everything into one cohesive, coherent, sensible, perceivable experience. And there's like, every dev, if I don't want to say if they're worth their salt, but most people who are in the game industry are making their own games on top of working for big stuff. Just ideas that they're playing around with. And I would have lunch over Christmas break with some of my best friends who are narrative designers. His name's Harvey Bickett. Love that man. Find him on LinkedIn. And we were just shooting the shit, just talking about, sorry, I don't know if you guys curse or not.
We do. You're good.
And it was just like, I had ideas that I was sharing with him. And immediately in like 5 minutes of conversation, he has ideas that I've never dreamed of that immediately fit into the world that I'm building and the ideas that I love. And I'm like, oh my God, like brilliance right in front of me, just from a simple dialogue over a coffee. It's like, imagine if we had better systems to like truly absorb all of the churning ideas and minds in a game studio where it's like, it's already fertile ground, right? Everyone's there. Most people aren't there just to get a paycheck. Like they're there because they're into it. They're interested. They're invested. Like, God, who more than QA has like played your damn game? It's like, it's a bed of ideas. It's extremely collaborative by nature.
Love that. Yeah, agree 100%. That's part of why IGA, the school works as it does. We're collaborative, multidisciplinary, because that's how games work, and that's how the best games get made, in my opinion. I think to call out a little personal story, when I worked at InView, I was the only game designer on the project for a period of time, which in some ways is really cool because you get to be like, I have the big, brilliant idea. But in a lot of ways, it kind of blows because you're like, maybe this? I don't know. So one of the things I started doing is I would host a weekly game design seminar where I would teach people something. I'd say, hey, here's some game design knowledge, specifically to try to increase the game design knowledge on the team so that I could get feedback from people.
Right.
And then the second half I would do is some brainstorming with them. So here's the current problem I'm working on. What do people think about this? And I would get all kinds of people from the whole organization to show up. And some of the best ideas that got put into that product were from totally random people. Like, somebody working in customer service or something comes in and goes, man, I would really love it if we had this. And I'd be like, yeah, wait, that's awesome. That's perfect.
Yeah,
100% collaboration.
It's so true.
Yeah. All right. So let's get into the topic of the day. So the title that you chose for us was Creating Intimate Player Connections to the Game World. So give us the 101, the introduction. What does that mean? And what are you trying to convey with that?
Yeah, so this is definitely, it's going to feel broad and maybe a little bit cloudy as a concept, but it's something I'm really, really deeply passionate about, and it's kind of a hard thing to nail down. I'm a terrible student and not an academic at all, so my education of games came, yes, from my professors in college and stuff like that, and they gave me good terms to apply to making games and stuff, but I, more than anything, draw from my childhood and from the games that have come out over time that have just it's a door into another world that books and movies sort of start to enter, but nothing quite does it like games do. And so there's this is sort of a concept best explained by example. If you've ever played Dead Space 1, the second you put the CD in the console, I'm dating myself now, PS3, it's like the moment that you see the company logo, even the EA logo, it's like you hear this ominous sort of rumbling of industrial machines, and the logo sort of flickers into view, and there's a bloodstained hand on it, and you're like, I'm in. You're already in.
This is
right?
Dead Space.
Yes, and then you see the title like fade in from this viscous fog, and it's like muddy, and the second you press start, there's like a strings from the symphony like rips, and you're like, whoa, what the hell's happening? And the main menu, you can see all this crazy shit floating in the background, and there's like the super sci-fi main menu, and it's like the experience is already going. You're already playing the game. You're already entering into it. And it breaks my heart to make this comparison because the Dead Space remake didn't do that. It absolutely did not replicate what the first game did. If you ever see it, there's like blood and gore warnings and stuff and all the normal company logos and junk. And then it's just right into the main menu. But there's no audio, there's no dramatic entrance, and I'm like, oh man, like come on guys, like what did you just miss out on? Or if you think about the first time you boot up Halo on the main menu, right, and you're immediately struck with that Gregorian chant. Like, how many videos have we seen of people going into real churches and like singing the Halo theme song? Right? It's like, yeah, it is timeless. It's absolutely iconic. It's legendary, and I think it's because the devs, whether they knew it or not, like nowadays you definitely would know it because there's so many great examples. It's like there's a notion that you want to invite the customer into a world they have never seen before, a story they've never heard, music they've never heard, gameplay they've ideally never tasted. It's like if you do it right off the cuff and you do it right, man, it's like you'll never forget it. Infamous 1 is one of my favorite game beginnings ever. It's like you boot up the game, it flips through the title cards, and then there's just this scene of this city park. There's people walking by, you can hear birds and kids and bikes and buses and stuff like that, and it just says press start at the bottom. The second you hit press start, all the lights go down. There's a huge giant glowing blooming explosion in the distance, and there's chaos. There's a bus flying, it takes out a helicopter, and then it cuts, right? And then this camera fades in to coal on this smoldering pile, and actually you hear this badass character, right? It's just like it's sewing this tapestry of mystery, of intrigue, and it's sizzling your eyebrows in the first 5 seconds of the game, and you're in. And if the game respects itself, if the game takes itself seriously and the presence of the player seriously, it will maintain that sensation. So if you
Hmm.
look at something like Gears of War 2, man, there's a degree to which it can still feel gamey because you always have the UI in the corner, right? You always see your chainsaw, the Lancer ammo count and stuff like that, or your grenade count, but it's minimal. But there's something about the game, even if you're playing with or without subtitles, it's like the characters and their dialogue and the music and the progression of mission to mission, it's so rich, it's so raw that it's easy to sort of blur out those other elements. Or like God of War, right? 2018. I mean, come on, man, all in one take. Like the genius of editing loading screens from these little like repeatable animations when he lifts the rock, right, and he puts it down behind him and then he turns and now the player has control again. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
don't limit player control. Set the stage the second the game, before the game even starts, and then maintain it, right? Let the game take itself seriously. And I think this has been tragically lost in some modern iterations of games of old classic franchises. I literally just posted a video that I found on LinkedIn, I think yesterday, and it was talking about Call of Duty when it used to take itself seriously. And if you play COD 4, like the original Call of Duty 4 from 2007, or Call of Duty World at War, or even Modern Warfare 2, like from the main menus, especially World at War, that's my favorite, man. The whole game maintains this gritty, grueling, dark ambiance, this atmosphere, and it never stops until you walk away from the game. And you play these new CODs, man, and I love Call of Duty, and it hurts me, and I love the people that work on it because I know them, they're my brothers and my sisters. And I know people have to make money to appease stockholders and whatnot, man. But it's like it has turned into this market page, right? It's like it feels like a Vegas slot machine, and it breaks my heart because it was once the height of the art form, right? I mean, COD 4's perk system and multiplayer, like that changed the godforsaken industry, man. Like it changed the game, and it breaks my heart to see it devolve into what it has. And I'm not shitting on the game. I'm not shitting on the people. You know what I mean? I can't iterate that enough. The game development is hard, and there's so many factors you have to work around and with, and it's just tough, man. But it frustrates me because I know what it was. I know what it could be. You know what I mean? If it respected that same level that it had before, it's like it did it then. Where is that? Where's that going? So in a broad sense, that's sort of the general topic. It's like, how do we as developers truly allow players the environment to bathe in a world they have not
Hmm.
experienced before and keep them there, right? How do we limit the interruptions to that experience? Because if you look at Halo 2, man, which to me is a cathedral, and stop me at any time because believe me, I'm ranting now. The gears are
You're good.
um, Halo 2 to me is a cathedral of the senses. Like
Hmm.
even when the game begins, even if you haven't played the first game, man, the fact that opening scene, the cutscene of seeing the Covenant dealing with the loss of the original Halo, and
Hmm.
it's a court case, right? Like someone's like, there's costs to what you did as Master Chief in the whole first game, and like you're showing that to the players, like unheard of, totally unheard of, and the level, the scale of drama that the game presents to you is what lasts because the gameplay, though it's one of the best first-person shooters ever made, but if you look at it, there's no progression system, there's no unlock system, there's no armor, there's no currency system, right? It's like on an Excel spreadsheet, it's damage numbers for weapons and balance and stuff, but that's it. It's a first-person shooter. And yet you remember it, and everybody would remember it. The music, every level has some of the best lines ever, to give the Covenant back their bomb. Are you kidding me? Like, that's it, man. It's great dialogue, it's great cinematics, and a really airtight first-person shooting experience. Even
Hmm.
like the way you transition out of a cutscene is so important because after that super long opening cutscene to Halo 2, it immediately cuts to Chief like, I need a weapon, right? And then Johnson's like, right this way. And then as you drop down to where the guns are before you have your first combat encounter, you can dual wield the dual SMGs for the first time, like you see Chief on the cover. So arguably, players are already in the game when they look at the cover. Man,
Whoa.
I was a little kid walking into Blockbuster seeing the giant Master Chief like cardboard cutout. It's like it was epic. And I wasn't even allowed to play the damn thing then. So it's like my imagination was already daydreaming about like, man, what is it like to be in that world? And then for the game to have hit its kind of execution, it is not done every day, right? Like we're not making hits like that every day. It's a lightning in a bottle to some degree, but it's worth study. You know what I mean? It's not like, yeah, but that was a spinoff. Like, yeah, that was worth. Yeah, but what did they do, man? How did they do it? Like, you gotta sink your teeth into that and get under the hood. What are those guys doing? What were they thinking? How did they do this?
Yeah.
Like, I think at large, like it's a timeless skill set, and I think players know it. Players know when a game comes out and it doesn't do that, which is why I wanted to mention it as a topic, because I don't see it discussed in articulation, and this is hardly articulation because I know I'm all over the map, but it's like,
but it's good.
Have so many
good stuff.
We have so many examples of games that have just performed miracles. Like, they have done it already, and we can study them, and you can duplicate, not copy, not plagiarize, but you can learn from the methods that they already employed and tie that together, right? Hell, man, even Borderlands 2, it's like that opening with the train sequence, it's like you won't forget that shit. It's so cool. It's so badass. Before you even move the camera or adjust your inverted XY, whatever, it's like you're in it. You're
with
so
freaking Cage the Elephant playing in the background. Amazing.
Exactly.
Incredible.
Yeah.
I think like a lot of what it sounds like you're talking about is largely immersion, is connecting a player to a real world. And there's a story that I tell a lot of my students in our level 1 class, because I'm trying to get them like pumped up. There's a story from a time where I lived in Mexico for a little while, and my partner is extremely spiritual. I'm like fairly spiritual myself. So we had met this like shaman guy. Yeah. Whatever you imagine when I say shaman is probably about right. And this dude is like super cool and like very down to earth and very willing to talk about basically anything. And we're talking with him, and we've spent 2 or 3 hours with him. We're having a great time. And at some point, the conversation kind of dies, and he goes, "So Willem, what do you do?" Talking about work. And I was like, oh, shit, I'm going to have to reveal to the shaman man that I'm a tech worker, and he's going to like judge me. And I tell him I work on video games. And this guy, he's got no shirt on. He's got like a big beard. He's like covered in, he's got all kinds of jewelry and stuff. He goes, you create new worlds. And I've never forgotten that statement. And that, I think, is largely what you're talking about. You are not creating a video game. Or at least the best of us aren't.
Yeah.
You are creating a new world for a player to experience. And so at any point when you pull the player out of that world, when you say, never mind, you're in a video game, you got to load for a second.
Yes.
You break the world. You're no longer in the world. You're back to reality. And then it takes time to get back there again after loading or whatever else has broken your immersion.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that ultimately is largely what we're talking about, I think. What you're talking about.
No, you nailed it, man. It's so real. It's so funny you mentioned spirituality too. Like, think of it what you will. I fell in love with Christianity at a young age, and I mean, there's a talking snake on page 2. It's like some of the biblical stories. Like, if you ever see Prince of Egypt, like the Exodus story is immense. It's incredible. So I think there's so much to draw from places like that, right? Like a genuinely, deeply soulful experience with our world that people can get in touch with, and I think games seize our faculties of motor control and our eyes and our ears and our imaginations in a way, right? It's like introducing just the layer of strategy into something you're doing. It's like, are you strategizing when you're reading a book? Not really. Or when you're watching a movie or a show, which doesn't demote those things, right? Those are great books, great movies, whatever, but games add something that it's like you're just, gears are turning that don't turn in the same way every day. And I think they have a capacity to do something that, when the developers seize that, instead of making a quick buck, the difference is exponential. And it's not to put down games like Vampire Survivors, right? Like, to me, that's a pure arcade game. And like, we've watched the birth of a new genre. Like, I played an embarrassing amount of Vampire Survivors, Brotato, Hall of Torment.
That game was good, man.
I love those games, man. And it's like, that doesn't demand an immersion from me. But it's a great game, right? So it's not universal by any means. Like, game design is too broad, too wild to tame under this one little umbrella. But the games that want to immerse players, it's like, man, when you do it right, boy, there's nothing like it.
It's so good. Yeah. Okay, so here's where I want to go then. Before we jump into community questions, I want to pick your brain on some of the simple ways that a game developer who's listening to this can implement in their own game, even a Vampire Survivors. So one of the things that I was thinking of, we had Kent Muddle, who's a narrative designer at Telltale. We had Kent Muddle come in and teach us at one point, and one of the things he had the students do was just change what their button text was, because that alone can make a big difference in immersion. Imagine you have a button that says start game, Or on a big adventure game, you change that to be embark. That tiny little bit of change can make it feel like you're in this world. So give me some of those. What are some of your top tips, implementable things that somebody could add to their own game to incorporate some of this?
Bless you for that example. I mean, that's genius out the gate. That is a flawless example of exactly this. When I think about um, a great example for me is, and it might have been kind of a parlor trick the way these guys did it, but in Dead Space 1, the way that you open the audio logs or the video logs, and you can still rotate the camera around Isaac, and now the video is like inverted, like that's incredible because it's like Isaac is actually watching the thing, and the camera, which is the player technically, right? The eyes of the player is like a disembodied spirit watching what's happening in reality. But a better, more simple, applicable example in the same game is like whenever you open a text log, right? It doesn't just dump the text in front of you, and it still uses the cool user interface that's projecting off of his suit, but the text is writing itself out. And there's a soundbite for that I'll never forget. Like it's just such a small detail, and it adds a tone of like, oh, like this is different. This is a different tangible, tactile experience for my ears than when I'm listening to just an audio log or when I'm watching a video log in the game. And like that's a little notch. Or like Metroid Prime. God, talk about a cathedral. Metroid Prime is one of my top 5 favorite games.
The greatest masterpieces of all time, easily.
It's phenomenal. And without one line of spoken dialogue, it's a masterpiece. Not one, right? Talk about atmosphere. But then in the beginning, before it cuts to the opening scene where Samus is landing on the frigate out in space, there's like text that pops up where it's like tracking, enemy contact tracked over Talon 4 or whatever. But there's an audio to the way that the text is being produced, right? And then it fades to black, and then it opens on the cutscene. It's like that's just scene transitions. That's just audio, right? It's just sci-fi little text that's sort of typing itself out as if you were Samus in her ship watching your computer like produce, data. It's so subtle. And like you said, man, it's like font. The font alone can get players into it, right? Like Oblivion from 2006, I think, is one of the greatest games ever made as well. And you contrast that to Skyrim, which is also one of the greatest games ever made. In Oblivion's UI, it's like this parchment scroll being unfurled every time you look at your character, right? And it's like, it still feels super video gamey because like, here's my inventory, this does this much damage, here's my gold count, right? Here's my character. But it's like the sound of you opening the menu, like moving it up and down, all the little, how even the character creator, right? Like it's like old D&D paintings of like, here's the mage, here's the spellcaster, here's the monk. Like that shit goes so far. And it's like, instead of just having it be bland text, like, yes, I would like to play the fighter or the tank. It's like, give me a picture, right? Make it feel like trading cards almost, right? Like, I choose this as my icon. Or hell, God, imagine if you were like if you were getting a tattoo. This is a brand new game design here, folks. Imagine you're choosing your character and you're playing like a generic soldier, even if it was in like Call of Duty, and you're creating a class, and it's like, all right, I'm going to be a heavy gunner, and it's like, 1st Infantry heavy gunner, like heavy weapons division or something. Or it's like recon division if you're a sniper, right? And it's got a little logo on it, like something like that. Is so cool. It's so intimate. It's in the world, right? The characters that you're playing as, even if they're nameless, faceless people, they are engaged with the world. So that when you...
Okay, wait.
Yeah, go ahead.
I have a yes and for this. Also, when you're picking those tattoos, do a little sound in the background and have the character go, ooh.
Oh, yeah. Exactly.
Oh.
Yeah, but you just see them.
Like, the juice.
Yes, exactly. Right? We're already doing it. We're doing it right here, right now. It's like those kinds of things go the distance. So they go the distance, man.
I have part of what I try to do on this podcast, that part of the reason this ever got started is totally selfish because I like talking to smart people like you, Jack. And I like learning from you. And one of the things I try to do is distill some of what we're learning from the guest into nice little sound bites, because that's easier for people to remember and easier for people to implement. So I have a couple that I think are like hard, easy rules. In-world UI. So things like Dead Space having the health on the back of the character, or having the UI pop up as something Isaac is actually reading. But I feel like I actually have more like a mindset rule than hard tips to give from this. And that mindset rule is, imagine the whole world from the player controlled perspective, from the PC's perspective. So when you are looking at the UI, the character would never actually see that UI. And so put it in the world, or make it something that the player character is actually experiencing or is somehow a part of their life.
Yeah,
That alone is maybe a big piece of immersion. Yeah.
no, that's solid. I mean, yeah, that one line alone is excellent. I'm even trying to think like because there's so many fantastic games that never did that, right? Like essentially Joel in The Last of Us, he never sees that crossbar on the right side of the screen or knows his ammo count or something like that, which is why
Mm-hmm.
although it's not a fun mechanic, I like games where like if you reload early, you lose the bullets that were already in the
Yeah, yeah.
magazine. Like it's not very fun, but it adds a tangibility
Very
where the
immersive.
character's like, oh shit, right? Um, so that's hard. It's hard because sometimes many times you don't have to do that at that level. But if you can do it and it fits the game and it's fun and it's smooth, it's like there are obvious examples of like, oh man, I don't want to sit through this animation of my character pulling the damn tablet out. I think there's this great YouTube channel called Girlfriend Reviews, and like one of their first videos, they're talking about Breath of the Wild and the audio bite of like pulling up the I don't know what the damn thing's called, like the Chica slate or whatever, and it makes like a like sound, and she like the girlfriend was like, I was so ready to just end it all after like the 500th time of hearing my boyfriend play and like hearing that sound effect. So I think there's like right and wrong ways to do it where it's like yes, Link is like himself pulling it up, and I think Dead Space does it magnificently subtle, like even when you're walking up to like things you could pick up. And there's other like gamey versions of it too, right? Where in BioShock it's like the items shimmer. There's like a little glint over like ammo that you can pick up and it'll catch your eye out in the environment. It's like maybe you could sell that, but it's still just a notch gamey. But no, I think your one line was you did the job for me. That was really well said.
Imagine the whole world from the PC's perspective. I like that. And I think, you point out here that that is not necessarily a rule for all games.
Yeah.
I think that you can incorporate a little bit of that in basically all games. I think a Vampire Survivor, great example. It's an arcade type game, so it's more about just a fun, quick little interaction. But even then, you can have you can imagine what this character is experiencing and make the game feel deeper as a result.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there may always be room to do that. There's always a capacity where you could do that for sure.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to do some community questions now. So Ryan is up on stage. Ryan, would you like to ask the first question of the day?
Yeah, hi. Great to talk to you. My question is kind of based on a discussion that happened in the Great Hall chat inside of this server a little bit ago. We were talking about innovation in games. So I was wondering, do you two find that games are often labeled as quote unquote innovative too frequently? And how do each of you define innovation in games?
That's a really good question. Do you want me to answer first, Will?
Yeah, it's
Right.
about you.
Yes, I think it can be thrown around like a marketing ploy, right? There's so many games that come out, and the marketing funding alone is staggering. And it's unfortunately painfully effective because then you end up paying $70 for something and you're like, this is not what was sold to me. But in terms of innovation specifically, I think No Man's Sky is one of the most brilliant technical innovations of the last decade by far. And to see how they had the raw concept at launch, as unpolished as it was, still produce hours of mystique and majesty. It's like now playing that game to see how much they've perfected or improved that system. It's like that's raw, real innovation. So I think for me, an innovative game, I think employs a blend of genres and things that players do in fascinating new ways, and will also introduce something players have never done before. It's like in Vampire Survivors, if you break that down, I have moved a 2D character on an open plane before, right? I don't know that I've necessarily automatically had weapons shoot out of my little character. I don't know that I'd played games like that before, nor had I had an experience bar that offers me a random selection of things, nor have I had to wait, survive for 30 real minutes of time playing this arcade game. And yet it's like, that's innovative, right? I've waited 30 minutes of time before for something. I've walked around, I've shot weapons in a 2D game before, but it has introduced all of those individual elements in a cohesive, coherent package, well presented to teach me how to play, right? So it's like that's raw innovation. Like that's a beautiful thing. So it doesn't necessarily, in my mind, have to be some insane engine breaking, industry trend setting thing like No Man's Sky did like Infinite Planets, man, like I've never seen procedural generation used like that. That's phenomenal. But a game like Vampire Survivors, right? It's taking, or even hell, battle royales. Are you kidding? It's like simple. I've fallen out of a plane before. I've never done it with 100 other people in a locked-in cage, right? Like it's just innovation sometimes can be a new blending of old things executed well and cohesively. I think that's what I'd say.
I love that. I mean, I think that's basically on the money. I think there's to answer the first part of the question, which is, are games labeled as innovative too often? I would say yes. I don't know if it's like a hard take, and I think the reason that happens is largely because we all like to feel like we're innovative, and that's okay. And I don't think I'm kind of thinking of this as like from like the entrepreneur mindset, like, oh yeah, I'm so innovative. And I think we all think about that. I think we all think of our games in that way, and I think that is okay. But I think a truly innovative game is basically what you're talking about, Jack, which is either a new mechanic or feature that we literally haven't experienced before, or the same mechanics and features combined in a new way. In one form or fashion, the player is experiencing something, perhaps playing a player fantasy that they have not yet been able to experience. I think that is largely what innovation is.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Awesome.
Thank you guys so much.
Of course. All right, we're going to have Rick up on stage next. Rick, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, so I was wondering, I really like what you're talking about with, when you jump into a game, and this is one of the best parts about nostalgia, where you open up a game that you loved and then suddenly like you're there, you see that title screen and you're like, yes, I'm about to have this experience. So I'm curious, what's the balance of setting the atmosphere that invites the player into the magic circle versus something that's more Pavlovian in nature, or are these things kind of just intertwined?
What do you mean by Pavlovian?
So it's like when you see it and like there's a certain sound that you hear that just kind of clues you in. Like I've been playing some mobile games where the very opening sound, Clash Royale. It's it's like you have that supercell do do do, and then it plays that jingle. That's very straightforward, but it's not so much atmosphere setting. But it does get me like primed to think I'm about to play this game.
Yeah, I think that's genius. I think that goes a long way to effectively and almost arguably permanently rope a player into your game, right? Because like you could be 70 years old and never forget that jingle. There's sound effects from games I'll never forget, like ever, right? The sound of, and sometimes you might not be able to pull it up in your own mind, but when you hear it, it's like you said, it's like a psychological trigger. Like, oh man, there it is. I don't know.
GameCube intro sound.
Oh yeah, right. It's like the PS2 sound, all kinds of stuff like that. Or the PS1 boot up sound. My God. I wonder. I think there's a degree to which it's good to have an intentionality to doing that. I don't know. I can't really think of a game where it just bombards you with an over intention of drowning the player in like little jingles and chimes and stuff. But I think it's genius to have a strong game design and then knowingly like, oh, this sounds good. Like they'll never forget this, right? Like this is great. This is intentional. Even like in BioShock, the in the first game and in the second game, there's like a gold shimmer around the objective item. It's like in the very beginning when you're in the bathysphere, right before you step out, and Atlas is like, "Would you kindly pick up that radio?" And you see it; it's shimmering gold. It's like I can hear that right now in my head. I did just play it last week, but I can't. I could easily probably still remember that, another time. And I don't even know that they did that intentionally, right? But obviously they're trying to grab your attention. And then when you hear that sound somewhere else, you recognize like, oh, this is a main objective. Like this is an item that I'm required to interact with going forward, or can look for in other items as well. So I think there's an intentionality to it that is extremely effective for sure.
What is the name of the game design mechanic where you are coloring objects of similar fashion the same way, or somehow like contextualizing? So like Mirror's Edge, anything you can grab as red.
Or like
there's totally a name for that.
There's probably a very academic title, no doubt. But
right.
Like you said, it's the second you think about it, it's easy to think of other stuff. I think Last of Us does that, like yellow language for climbing, and Uncharted does it too. It's genius little consistent clues like that.
Yeah, contextualization or something like that. Affordances, says Ryan. You said it confidently, so maybe that's right. I don't know. Color coding, says Petunia. That's probably a more specific one. Yeah, I think Rick, it's definitely an interesting question. I actually like how you're thinking of it in a Pavlovian context. Like, I'm going to set up the player in a specific way so that they have like a subconscious reaction to something. Um, Legend of Zelda opening a chest is partly exciting because of the sound effect, and I feel like you could argue that you've like trained the player to be excited by that sound, which is an interesting way of thinking about it. I don't know what the balance is per se. I think probably there's only so much room for that in a player's experience.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but it's pretty cool.
Yeah, with setting the atmosphere, you can do things like I know in the game I'm working on, I have a high fidelity graphic of the mech that you pilot. And then when it like says this paints the picture in your head, this is going to be what you're playing as. And then when you get into the game, it's a much lower fidelity image, but you have that other one biasing your interpretation of the lower resolution sprite.
And you could have a badass soundbite whenever you get into the mech. Whenever you go from like whenever the player like is entering the mech, right? There's like some cool sound of like machines booting up, or like you can hear like a heavy industrial thing, like as if the pilot chair is like locked in now and you're in it. I think in Dead Space 1, whenever you get in, whenever Isaac changes his suit, right? Like he gets in it and then it like snaps him in place. Like never forget that sound. So it's almost like a reward for letting your players start to engage with the game. No, that's really cool, man.
I like that a lot. All right, I've called Ryan back up to the stage. Ryan, do you want to ask about level design? And thank you for the question, Rick.
Yeah, I can ask about it really quick.
Yeah.
I gotta pull it back up. So this is kind of specifically for you, Jack. You've worked on a lot of personal projects, QA at Activision and Treyarch, and leading on to 31st and now NetEase. Is there a specific player kit that you really, really enjoyed designing levels around? And if there is, what made that player kit so enjoyable to work with? Also, how did you then implement in your design ways to retain the player's attention utilizing that player kit?
Yeah, that's a great ass question, man. Most of the player kits at this point that I've worked on, I can't talk about because none of it's seen the light of day yet. If it ever will, I can't say one way.
I kind of
Game
assumed
industry.
that. I was
But
like, there's a chance that you just have like an NDA and can't talk about some things. So.
welcome to the industry. So much we can't talk about, but I could talk at length about COD, because it's stuff I worked on has already come out. So I did a lot of work on the Fireteam Dirty Bomb maps on Cold War, Call of Duty Cold War, and I did all of the downtown destruction for, I think it was season 6 of Warzone, when like the ground fissured and stuff and the stadium cracked. Like I did that, like I designed that. Obviously with an army of other people helping me execute it, but that was one of my favorite pieces of work I'd ever done. So the Call of Duty kit, right? It's like something billions of people have played, something so many people know so intimately, and with not tremendous innovation over time, right? Like I wasn't working on Black Ops 3 with like the jetpacks or something like that. Like what I worked on was very boots on the ground COD, which is iconic and you know, for a reason, because it's so accessible, it's so strong, it's so close knit in itself. And so even when I was thinking about the destruction and stuff, it's like, how do I create, and I'm always thinking about this in level design, how do I create a playground to replicate what it feels like to be a little kid running and skipping and swinging and jumping off of a swing set, right? Like you go to the park and you see kids falling off of crap and sliding down something and, trying to see if they can reach that. And so in the context of Call of Duty, especially in Warzone, and I loved Battle Royale design for Call of Duty because there's so many shackles that just melt off of you. If you're making 6v6 Call of Duty, every sight line is precious and has to be measured and metered and focused. Like I was so intimidated by the 6v6 level design, I almost caved. I frankly did. I was like, I'll do Warzone. I like this better. Because it was just so intense what those guys have to do and consider when they're making the geometry of the level. But the ways that I would try and keep players interested in a space that I was designing, I mean, really, man, it's very childlike. Like you get the concept from on high, and then you work with the art team to make sure that your ideas and your designs are going to fit with the rest of the game and the historical context, the architectural context, whatever. And then it's down to you as the designer. Once you get all of the guidelines and boxes that you have to fill, then it's just you. How am I going to introduce geometry that facilitates gameplay, right? Level design always follows game design in my mind, because what if I don't know what the player can do, how do I build a space for him? So when you take a famous kit like Call of Duty, there's a lot of expectations that players have, right? Especially in a combat competitive scenario. If I'm getting shot at, where can I respond to? And the player, to a degree, is like they walked themselves into that open field, so they're going to anticipate the kind of exposure, right? But is there ways that I can mitigate that kind of frustration that can happen in those big spaces? So if there's a huge distance between two POIs, points of interest, can I litter breadcrumb points for them to run to here, then to here, then to here, then to here safely and get there, right? So that there's a drama that you start to design from filling a space, right? Like here's a giant open field between two POIs. That's a blank canvas for you to paint on, and tell a story. Maybe it's a plane that crashed and snapped in half, and one of the engine blocks is a hazard that if you walk up to it while it's still spinning, you die or whatever, right? But it's cover. So there's a risk of like, oh man, shit, if I'm on this side of the thing, I might risk myself, but I have to take cover from who's shooting me, right? Like geometry in games, when it's done well in the context of the game and the setting and the atmosphere, like you can do, there's almost an infinite number of stuff you could do, right? You could, the field in between those two POIs could be a construction site that never finished. So now you're like diving, you're jumping down into these giant concrete pits, and you're risking that you're going to be like a cat, a fish in a barrel, but you're not running in the open field. So there's just sort of like a sense of a playground that you look at the canvas that you have, you think about what the player can and can't do, and then I'll tell you, for level design, flow through a space is king. Nothing is more important than flow. How does it feel to move through this space? And when you're thinking about if the fastest way is point A to B, and there's factors like I could get shot from any direction, then how do you, in a cohesive, sensible context, like framing it as a construction site or a crashed plane or something, right? Give it a theme. Maybe it's a storage yard for trucks and other industrial vehicles and cranes and crap. Like you start to litter the space between those points for the player to move through those things. And you have to keep in mind, like, oh, if I get shot from this space, or this is a little more close quarters, I have a shotgun, so I'm going to feel more confident in this space. It's hard to answer in a clean, cohesive nutshell, but there's very much a sense of like you have to know the player experience so intimately that you can visualize yourself like, oh man, I made this level. If I die here, I'm going to be pissed. How do I fix that, right? If I was to get shot from here, I'm going to be pissed off. You want to limit the friction points in a space for a player, because you have to visualize like, man, okay, I'm going to go here. Oh yeah, and then I'm going to see that guy up there, but I'm going to want to get up there. So is there a way I can see, okay, yeah, I'll stack these shipping containers, have a nice little epic leap for players to make, and then there'll be a ladder waiting for them on the other side, right? You're telling us micro narratives in a set space, and it doesn't matter what kind of game that you're working on. Like you can do that in any game that requires level design, but Call of Duty especially was so fun because it is so iconic and it's so strong. It's so simple and it's so tight, and it's grounded to a degree, right? Like Apex Legends is people, falling out of the sky and riding these crazy zip lines and stuff. So sorry, it was a long-winded answer, but it's a great fun, and it's not impossible.
That's so many good pullouts from that. I love the idea of micro narratives in your level design. I love the idea of flow first. You're trying to figure out players actually doing. And then it also comes back a little bit to the immersion conversation we were having earlier, which is instead of thinking about it from the PC's point of view, instead thinking about it from the actual player's point of view. So what is the player going to be experiencing? What are those friction moments? How can you eliminate them unless it's supposed to be an annoying part of the game? Yeah, that's a good answer.
Yeah. Great question.
Yeah. All right. We're at the end of the episode. Thank you, Ryan, for your question. That was awesome. Before we say goodbye, though, we like to, Jack, on this show, ask for some homework. So what is an assignment that we can give to listeners in the next week or so, something they can do realistically in just about a week, that they can practice some of what we've talked about here today with?
That's a great question. I should have prepared for that. I think if you can list top 5 of your favorite games you've ever played, I think it's an excellent exercise to put the emotions that you feel when playing those games on the observation table and have a dissection, right? Oh, I love when this happens. This makes me feel really warm and excited. This makes me feel irritated and frustrated. Like, oh, I hate this part. Put that on the observation table. Take 5 games, 5 of your favorite games of all time, and intimately analyze and study and even assign academic titles to them, right? Like, there's a concept I learned about in college from my professor Jack Burrows, who invented like Crisis, and great guy. He taught us about, I think it's MDA, mechanics, dynamics, and aesthetics, and also the 3 C's: camera, control, and character. And so if you think about it, try that, right? It's like, can you break down um, when the 3 C's are introduced in your favorite games? When does the character introduced? When is the camera presented to the player, right? Are the controls presented? It cracked me up recently. I played Ratchet and Clank 1, the original, and like, they don't teach you shit. It's like, they don't tell you how to move, they don't tell you how to jump, they don't tell you how to swing or anything like that. I think once you get into it, like, they start to teach you little tutorials, but off the bat there's nothing. And there's plenty of games that will very strictly handhold you at the very beginning. So it's funny to see like how games will sometimes trust the player versus other times they won't. And that's worth studying. If your favorite game did that one way or another, analyze how effective that was, right, to you when the first time you played it. Because when you're like a 6-year-old kid, you'll just press buttons until you remember what happens. But people will play as an adult and be frustrated, like, what the F do I do? Like, what am I expected to do? It's like, have we lost that sense of childlike curiosity? And how can we facilitate that? So I would analyze 5 of your favorite games of all time and just sort of pick apart things that you either loved or hated and understand, can you understand why that decision was made? Is there evidence to suggest like, oh, they did this because of that, or they really wanted this to happen, so they had to sacrifice the experience here to make sure that happened, right? Like, oh, they really want you to see that cutscene, so they won't even let you like turn the camera outside of this little box, but it feels annoying. Analyze that, like, why did they force me to do that? Oh, because they wanted me to see that. I think if you could make like a 10-point bullet point list for each one of those games, that's my curriculum. There, I did it.
Love it. Well done. All right. So, homework for the next week. I want you to Jack wants you to take your top 5 games and create 10 bullet points on what works and what doesn't work about them. But do it very academically. Why doesn't it work? Why does it work? So 5 games, 10 bullet points apiece, 50 total bullet points. When you do that, post that to LinkedIn for us. Tag Jack, tag the Indie Game Academy. We'll give you some feedback. We'll give you some thoughts. You can use the hashtag IGLHhomework. All right. It is the end of the episode. Jack, is there any last messages you want to give to the audience or anything you'd like to plug here at the very end?
Oh, man. I would say really, really let yourself enjoy the beauty of this art form, the majesty of it. No, nothing held back. Like, allow yourself to be free of cynicism, even free of analysis sometimes, right? Like, games are so freaking cool. And if you can stomach like older graphics, like, go back
Yes.
to some of the greats of the old times and play them as they were. You know what I mean? There's remasters of certain things. Like, I prefer Halo 2 vanilla. Like, play it as they had then, and you will see the tools. Like, what were they able to achieve with the tools they had at the time? How effective was the storytelling then? Like, just bathe in it, man. Like, let your passion ignite, baby. Like, this is such a cool freaking industry, and if we get to work in it, man, like, I get to get up every day and work in this stuff. Like, do it. Let the fires burn, man. Like, get in it. Do it.
I love what an incredible final message. I love it. Mike in the comments just quoted you. Really, really let yourself enjoy the beauty of this art form. Let everything go. Aven Burrows. Amazing. What a fantastic final message. By the way, just to call it out, Ryan was correct. The term that we were trying to think of was affordances, which is the relation between the user, objects, and possible actions of the game. That make it easy for the player to understand the possible interactions with the game's elements. So there you go. One final piece of trivia for you, affordances. And that's going to do it for the episode. I have had a wonderful day. This has been a really good episode. I love your energy, Jack. It's infectious. Really brought a lot to this first episode of 2024. As always, if you enjoy this episode, we ask that you send it along to just one other person who might enjoy it too. Post it to LinkedIn for us, whatever else. Jack, thank you for being here. Thank you for answering these questions. Audience, thank you for asking questions, and listeners, thank you for listening. We'll be here again Wednesday, 12 p.m. next week. Come and join us. There's links down below. All right. Goodbye, everybody.
Godspeed.